The Grand Hall of Zenthar Prime, a human-controlled space station, was filled with whispers. High-ranking officers, diplomats, and soldiers stood in silence as they watched the latest tribute from the Tasheri Empire. The war between humans and the Tasheri had ended months ago, and now, as part of their surrender, the defeated alien race sent gifts to prove their loyalty. Among the treasures, rare minerals, advanced weapons, and priceless artifacts, stood Xyra. She was tall, graceful, and unmistakably Tasheri. Her silver-blue skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and her deep violet eyes burned with quiet defiance. Though she wore the traditional silk robes of a servant, there was no submission in her stance. Her sharp, claw-like nails flexed at her sides, a silent reminder that she was no ordinary gift. Beside her, an elderly Tasheri ambassador bowed deeply before the human commanders. As a symbol of our peace, we present Xyra of House Varek, a trained servant for Captain Elias Carter, hero of the war. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew Captain Carter. He was a skilled warrior, a brilliant strategist, and the man who led the final battle against the Tasheri forces. Some expected him to accept the gift gladly, while others wondered if he would refuse. Elias Carter stepped forward. He was a tall man with short, dark hair and sharp green eyes. His uniform was crisp, his posture strong, but his expression was unreadable. He studied Xyra for a long moment before speaking. "I don't own slaves." His voice was calm but firm. The Tasheri ambassador's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "It is not slavery. It is an honor for a Tasheri to serve their superior." Xyra flinched, just barely, but Elias noticed. "I fought for freedom," Elias said coldly. "I won't accept this." A human general cleared his throat, stepping closer. "Captain Carter, this is a delicate situation. The Tasheri are offering this as part of their peace treaty. If you reject their tribute, it could be seen as an insult." Elias exhaled through his nose. He looked at Xyra again. She stood tall, her face blank, but her fists were clenched at her sides. She wasn't here by choice. She had been sent like an object, a trophy of war. Finally, Elias spoke. "Fine, but I won't treat her as a servant. If she's coming with me, she's free to make her own choices." The ambassador stiffened. "That is highly unusual." "Then consider it my own tribute to peace," Elias said. Without waiting for permission, he turned and walked away. For a second, Xyra didn't move. Then, with slow, measured steps, she followed him out of the grand hall. A silent war begins. The walk to Elias's personal quarters was tense. Xyra remained silent, her sharp eyes studying everything. The human soldiers they passed whispered, watching her with either curiosity or suspicion. The Tasheri had been their enemy for years. Many had lost friends in the war. When they reached his quarters, Elias gestured for her to enter first. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The room was simple but spacious. A large bed, a desk covered in reports, a window showing the vast emptiness of space. There were no chains, no locked doors. Elias leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he said. "I meant what I said. You're not a servant." Xyra turned to face him, her violet eyes unreadable. "And if I leave, where will I go?" Elias hesitated. That was a good question. The Tasheri had sent her here, and her people wouldn't take her back now. Humans still didn't trust her kind, and she had nowhere else to turn. "You can stay here," Elias said finally, "but you don't owe me anything." She stared at him, searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded once. "Very well." The first night, Elias sat at his desk, pretending to read reports, but he was fully aware of the silent figure across the room. Xyra stood near the window, staring at the stars. She didn't move, didn't speak. After a while, Elias sighed. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep here." Xyra turned slightly. I do not need your kindness. It's not kindness. It's just logic. You need rest, and I'm used to sleeping anywhere. She studied him for a long time then, without another word, sat on the edge of the bed. Elias smirked. That's progress, I guess. She didn't respond. The war between humans and the Tashari was over. But a new war had begun, a silent battle of trust, pride, and understanding. And neither of them was willing to lose. Zira woke up before the artificial lights of Xanthar Prime flickered to life. The station was still quiet, only the distant hum of machinery breaking the silence. She had slept lightly, her warrior instincts keeping her alert. Even now, she didn't fully trust her surroundings. She glanced toward the desk. Captain Elias Carter was still there, his head resting on his folded arms. He had fallen asleep while working. Zyra's violet eyes studied him carefully. A human, a soldier, and yet different. She had expected cruelty, maybe arrogance. The Tashari were proud warriors, and humans had humiliated them in war. She had assumed Elias would treat her like a conquered prize. But instead, he had freed her. He had given her choices. It made no sense. Her gaze shifted to the door. It was unlocked. She could leave, but where would she go? Zira exhaled softly and turned away. She wasn't ready to answer that question yet. The first morning, Elias woke up to the smell of something strange. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and saw Xyra standing near the food processor, inspecting a steaming cup of something. He frowned. Is that my coffee? She turned slightly, holding the cup as if it were a fragile artifact. It smells offensive. Elias chuckled. It tastes worse. Xyra lifted a single elegant brow, then took a small sip. Her face remained unreadable, but she quietly set the cup down and pushed it far away. Elias smirked. Told you. She crossed her arms. I have tasted worse. Elias stretched, standing up. So, what's your plan? Xyra blinked. Plan. You're free now, he reminded her. You can do whatever you want. Xyra looked away. I do not know what I want. Elias nodded, expecting that answer. Well, until you figure it out, you might as well learn how to survive here. Xanthar Prime isn't exactly friendly toward Tashari. Her expression hardened. I do not need protection. Elias raised his hands in surrender. Never said you did, but this is a human station. You don't know the rules, the systems, or the people. If you want to survive here, you need to understand them. Zira narrowed her eyes. And you will teach me. Elias shrugged. If you're willing to learn. There was a long silence. Then, Xyra gave a small nod. Very well. The lesson begins. Their first stop was the training bay. The moment they stepped inside, all eyes turned to them. Human soldiers stopped mid-sparring, whispering among themselves. A Tashari, walking freely beside Captain Carter. It was unheard of. Xyra ignored the stares, her posture straight, her expression blank. But Elias could feel the tension in the air. One soldier, a broad-shouldered man named Lieutenant Hayes, stepped forward. He smirked. So this is the famous tribute. Xyra's fingers twitched. She recognized the tone. Mocking, challenging. A test. Elias stayed calm. She's not a tribute. She's here to learn. Hayes crossed his arms. Learn what? How to kneel. A dangerous silence fell over the room. Elias saw Xyra's muscles tense. She wasn't one to let insults slide. Before she could react, Elias spoke. Actually, I was going to teach her how to win a fight. You want to help? Hayes chuckled. You want me to spar with her? Xyra stepped forward before Elias could respond. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. I do not need your permission to fight. Hayes grinned. All right, princess. Let's see what you've got. The fight. The sparring area was cleared. Soldiers gathered around, eager to see the fight. A human versus a Tashari. Elias stood at the edge, arms crossed. He wasn't worried. He had seen Tashari warriors in battle. The fight began. Hayes lunged first, throwing a fast punch. Zyra dodged effortlessly, her movements fluid like a shadow. She countered with a sharp strike to his ribs, making him stumble back. Gasps filled the room. Hayes growled and charged again, this time with a series of quick jabs. Zyra sidestepped, ducked, and twisted, avoiding every hit. Then, in a flash, she swept his legs out from under him. Hayes hit the ground hard. The room fell silent. Zyra stepped back, unbothered. Your stance is weak. Hayes sat up, blinking in shock. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. Damn, you're fast. Elias smirked. Told you. The soldiers murmured among themselves. Some still looked wary, but a few nodded in approval. Respect had been earned. Zyra turned to Elias. What is next? Elias grinned. Now we find you a real job. A new path. Later that evening, Zyra sat in Elias's quarters, thinking about the day. She had expected to be treated like an outsider. And she was. But for the first time, she had been more than just a tribute. She had proven herself. Elias leaned against the wall. You handled yourself well today. Zyra glanced at him. I do not need your praise. Elias chuckled. I wasn't praising you, just stating a fact. Zyra studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. It wasn't much, but it was the first step towards something new. And she was ready for the challenge. Zyra stood near the viewing window of Zenthar Prime, staring into the endless darkness of space. Stars blinked in the distance, scattered like tiny silver shards. She had spent most of her life on warships or battlefields, never truly stopping to admire the vastness of the universe. Now she was here, on a human station, a place that should have been her prison, yet it was not. She clenched her fists. The humans had won the war. They had taken everything from her people, their honor, their power, their freedom. And yet Elias Carter had done something unexpected. He had set her free. She still didn't understand him. He had every right to treat her as nothing more than a war trophy, yet he refused. He had even trained her, given her a purpose. But was this truly freedom? Could she ever be more than just a defeated warrior in an enemy's world? A dangerous offer. The door behind her slid open, and Elias walked in. He held a data tablet in one hand, his other hand resting casually on his hip. You're staring at space again, he said. Zyra didn't turn. It is quiet. Elias walked to his desk and placed the tablet down. I've been thinking. That is dangerous, Zyra said dryly. Elias smirked. Very funny. He picked up the tablet and turned it toward her. I put in a request with the station commander. If you want, you can take official status here. You won't just be a guest anymore. Zyra finally turned, eyes narrowing. Official status. Elias nodded. You'd be recognized as a civilian of the station. You could get a real job, earn credits, make your own choices. Zyra stared at him. And what do you get from this? Elias met her gaze without hesitation. Nothing. Just figured you deserved better than being stuck in my quarters forever. Zyra hesitated. Was it truly possible to have her own place, her own choices? But before she could answer, a sharp alarm blared through the station. The Tashari uprising. Elias tapped his earpiece. Carter here. What's going on? A voice crackled through. Security breach. Tashari infiltrators spotted in Sector 12. Armed. And hostile. Zyra's heart pounded. Tashari. Here. Elias grabbed his weapons belt. Stay here. Zyra grabbed her own blade. No. Elias turned. Zyra. These are my people, she said firmly. I need to see for myself. Elias hesitated, then nodded. Stay close. They rushed out, face to face with the past. The station's lower sectors were in chaos. Red emergency lights flashed, and security teams moved in formation. Gunfire echoed through the hallways. Elias and Sarah arrived to see a group of Tasheri rebels, dressed in stolen uniforms, taking cover behind supply crates. They were young, barely more than recruits. A human officer shouted, "Drop your weapons." One of the Tasheri, the leader, stepped forward. His silver-blue skin and violet eyes were just like Khazar's, but his face was twisted with anger. "Khazar." His voice was sharp with betrayal. "You stand with them." Zyra's stomach clenched. She knew him. Varen, her childhood friend, her battle brother. Varen's hands curled into fists. "You fight for the enemy now." Zyra's grip tightened on her blade. "I do not fight for them. But I do not fight against them either." Varen's face darkened. "They made you weak." Elias stepped forward. "She's not weak. She's making her own choices." Varen snarled. "A choice? She had no choice. They took everything from us." Elias Carter, "You wouldn't understand." Zyra's heart pounded. She had felt the same anger once. But what had anger changed? The security team raised their weapons. Elias held up a hand, stopping them. "You don't have to do this," Elias said calmly. "This isn't a war zone anymore." Varen laughed bitterly. "That's where you're wrong, human. The war never ended for us." And then he raised his weapon. A split-second decision. The world slowed. Zyra saw the rage in Varen's eyes the moment his finger pulled the trigger. She didn't think. She moved. A sharp crack echoed through the air. Varen fell back, clutching his shoulder where Zyra's blade had struck, stopping his shot. His eyes widened in shock. "You?" His voice trembled. "You chose them over me." Zyra's chest ached. "No, Varen. I chose peace." The other rebels hesitated, their confidence shattered. The security team quickly moved in, disarming them. Varen looked at Zyra one last time before being led away. His face was filled with anger, but also hurt. Zyra turned away, her hands shaking. The final chains broken. Back in Elias's quarters, Zyra sat in silence. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. Elias leaned against the wall. "You okay?" Zyra's voice was quiet. "No." Elias sighed. "You did what you had to do. I betrayed my own kind." Elias shook his head. "You stopped more bloodshed. That takes more strength than mindless loyalty." Zyra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with something unreadable. "You believe that?" "I do." A long silence passed. Then Zyra took a deep breath. "I will take the official status," she said finally. Elias raised a brow. "You sure?" Zyra nodded. "I cannot change the past, but I can decide my future." For the first time, she was truly free. Zyra stood before a large holographic screen in Zenthar Prime's registration office, her violet eyes scanning the document. At the bottom, a blinking icon awaited her confirmation. Applicant: Zyra of the Tasheri Empire. Status: Independent civilian of Zenthar Prime. Her fingers hovered over the screen. This moment was supposed to be simple, just a formality. But deep inside, it felt like something more. It was the breaking of an old identity. For most of her life, she had been a Tasheri warrior, bound by honor, duty, and loyalty to her people. But now, she was choosing something new, a life without a master, a life without war. Second thoughts. Elias's voice broke the silence. He stood beside her, arms crossed, his usual relaxed smirk replaced by quiet patience. Zyra inhaled deeply. "Once I do this, I will have no people, no home." Elias nodded. "Or you'll have the freedom to make a new home, wherever you want." A long pause. Then, with steady fingers, Zyra pressed the confirmation icon. The screen flashed "Approved" in green letters. It was done. She was no longer a slave, a tribute, or a warrior of the Tasheri. She was simply Zyra. A new beginning. Later that day, Elias led Xyra through the central hub of Xanthar Prime. The vast station pulsed with life. Traders, engineers, officers, and civilians of all species moved around them. It was a place of opportunity, but also chaos. Xyra walked with careful confidence, her sharp eyes scanning everything. The weight of the decision she had made earlier still sat heavy in her chest, but she would not show it. "You need a job," Elias said casually. Xyra arched an eyebrow. "I am a warrior. Do you expect me to sit behind a desk?" Elias chuckled. "Not exactly. But you can't just wander around looking scary all day." Before she could respond, a voice called out, "Captain Carter, you've got a minute." A human woman in a security uniform approached, her gaze flicking curiously to Xyra before settling on Elias. Elias nodded. "Lieutenant Ross, what's up?" Ross held up a data pad. "We need extra hands for security patrol. Shortage of trained fighters. You know anyone who'd be a good fit?" Elias grinned. "Actually, I do." Xyra blinked. "You are suggesting I work in human security?" Ross looked skeptical. "She's one of them, isn't she?" Xyra met Ross's eyes without hesitation. "I am not one of them anymore. I am my own." Ross hesitated. Then she turned to Elias. "You trust her?" Elias didn't even pause. "Yeah, I do." Ross sighed. "All right. We'll give her a trial shift." She glanced at Tyra. "Report tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As Ross walked away, Xyra folded her arms. "You had this planned, didn't you?" Elias shrugged. "You need a job. You can fight. It makes sense." Xyra sighed but nodded. "Very well." First day on the job. The next morning, Xyra stood in the security office, adjusting the lightweight armor they had given her. It felt strange, not like Tesheri battle gear, but functional enough. Lieutenant Ross handed her a data tablet. "Your duty is simple: patrol the station, prevent disturbances, and report anything suspicious." Xyra nodded. "Understood." Her first shift was uneventful at first. She walked through the crowded market district, her mere presence causing some uneasy glances. Many still saw her as an enemy, a former warrior of the Tesheri Empire. She ignored them. Then, near one of the docking bays, she spotted a group of men arguing. Two humans and a reptilian trader were in a heated dispute, their voices rising. Xyra approached. "What is the problem here?" One of the humans sneered. "None of your business, alien." Xyra remained calm. "If you are causing a disturbance, it is my business." The reptilian trader gestured angrily. "They are trying to cheat me. I delivered the goods, but they refuse payment." One of the humans scoffed. "Because the goods were defective." Xyra narrowed her eyes. "Show me the merchandise." The trader opened a crate, revealing mechanical parts. Xyra inspected them. To an untrained eye, they seemed fine, but she noticed the welding was weak. These parts would fail quickly. She turned to the trader. "You knew these were faulty." The trader tensed. I did not." Xyra's voice was calm but firm. "Return the payment. Now." The trader hesitated, then reluctantly transferred the credits back. One of the humans smirked. "Guess you're not all bad, alien." Xyra ignored the comment and walked away. A small victory. When Xyra returned to the security office at the end of her shift, Ross studied her. "Not bad. You kept things under control." Xyra simply nodded. Ross leaned back in her chair. "Look, I won't lie. People will be watching you. Some don't trust you. But if you keep proving yourself, that'll change." Xyra met her gaze. "I do not need their approval. I only need to do my job." Ross smirked. "Good answer. See you tomorrow." As Xyra left, she found Elias waiting outside, arms crossed. "So, how was your first day?" Xyra thought for a moment. Then, for the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. It was acceptable. Elias laughed. That's the best compliment I've ever heard from you. Zaira looked around the station. It was not home. Not yet. But for the first time, she felt like she belonged to something again. A new path. A new purpose. She was no longer just a warrior. She was something more. Zaira walked through the bustling corridors of Zenthar Prime, her sharp violet eyes scanning the crowd. Her new security uniform felt strange. Lighter than Tasheri battle armor, but still functional. It had been a week since she started working security, and though many still watched her with suspicion, no one could deny that she was efficient. She had broken up fights, stopped thieves, and even assisted in a few high-priority cases. Some humans were warming up to her. Others still saw her as an enemy in disguise. She didn't care. She was here to do her job. To prove herself, not to them, but to herself. But deep inside, a question still haunted her. Was she truly free, or had she simply exchanged one set of chains for another? A familiar face. As Tyra patrolled one of the quieter sections of the station, she noticed a figure moving through the shadows. Someone trying too hard to remain unnoticed. Her instincts flared. She followed. The figure turned a corner into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. Zaira's hand moved toward her weapon as she stepped forward. You should not be here, Zaira. She froze. That voice. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a Tasheri male with silver-blue skin and piercing violet eyes. His uniform was patched and worn, but his posture was still that of a soldier. Varen, Zaira said quietly. Her former battle brother, the same man she had wounded during the Tasheri attack a week ago. Varen's face was unreadable. I did not think I would see you again so soon. Zaira narrowed her eyes. Why are you here? Varen exhaled slowly. I came to give you a chance. A chance to return home. The temptation. Zaira stiffened. I have no home. Varen shook his head. You do. You always have. He stepped closer. The war is not over. Hydra. The humans think they have won, but our people still fight. They are gathering forces, preparing for something bigger. Zaira's jaw clenched. That war destroyed us. Varen's voice grew sharp. No, surrender destroyed us. Silence. Then he took a deep breath. Come with me. Fight by my side. Be a warrior again. For the first time in weeks, Zaira hesitated. She had sworn loyalty to her people once. She had fought, bled, and suffered for them. And yet, Elias's words echoed in her mind. You're not weak. You're making your own choices. Zaira's fingers curled into a fist. No. Varen's expression darkened. What? Zaira stepped back. I have made my choice. Varen's eyes flashed with anger. You have chosen them. The same people who destroyed our world. Zaira's voice was steady. No, I have chosen myself. Varen stared at her, his face a mixture of fury and disappointment. Then his gaze flicked to the small communicator on her wrist. His eyes narrowed. You called them, he realized. Zaira didn't answer. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Security officers rushed in, weapons raised. Elias was at the front. Varen's expression twisted. You betrayed me again. Zaira met his gaze, pain in her heart but certainty in her voice. No, Varen. I am saving you from your own destruction. Varen took a step back, his jaw tightening. Then, in a swift motion, he pressed a device on his wrist. A bright flash erupted. A smoke bomb. By the time the smoke cleared, Varen was gone. The aftermath. Back in the security office, Elias leaned against the wall, watching Zaira closely. You all right? He asked. Zaira exhaled slowly. He was my family once. Elias nodded. And now? Zaira looked away. Now, he is lost. Elias studied her. Then, after a moment, he smirked. You know, for someone who says they don't care, You sure take this seriously. Zaira's lips twitched slightly. You humans do not understand honor. Elias shrugged. Maybe. But I understand loyalty. And today, you proved something. Zaira raised an eyebrow. What is that? Elias's expression softened. That you're not just here to survive. You're here because you believe in something. Zaira thought about that. Was it true? She had fought for her people out of duty. Then, she had lived as a captive out of survival. But now, she was here because she had chosen to be. She was no longer a slave, no longer a warrior of a fallen empire. She was something new, and for the first time, she was okay with that. Zaira stood at her usual patrol station in Zenthar Prime's market district, her sharp violet eyes scanning the bustling crowd. It had been 3 days since her encounter with Varen, and the memory of his words still lingered. Come with me. Be a warrior again. She had refused. Yet, deep inside, she knew this was not the last time she would see him. The Tashari were planning something bigger. And if Varen had risked coming to the station just to speak with her, that meant they were closer than anyone suspected. Elias's voice echoed in her mind. You're not just here to survive. You're here because you believe in something. Zaira had made her choice. Now, she had to defend it. A strange warning. As she continued her patrol, a small hooded figure stepped out of the shadows and approached her. The figure's skin was pale blue, with large black eyes, a member of the Rixari species, known for their information networks. The Rixari's voice was low. They are coming. Zaira's body tensed. Who? The ones you turned away from. The Rixari's eyes darted around nervously. They will not ask again. Before Zaira could ask more, the figure vanished into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. Zaira's fingers tightened around her weapon. This was not just a warning. It was a promise. A sudden attack. Before Zaira could report the incident, a sudden explosion shook the market district. People screamed as a shockwave tore through a supply station, sending debris flying. Zaira shielded her face as a second blast erupted near the docking base. Emergency alert. All security teams report immediately. Elias's voice crackled through her communicator. Zaira was already moving. Through the smoke and chaos, she spotted a group of armored figures emerging from the wreckage. Tashari warriors. They moved with precision, their weapons aimed at the crowd, not firing, but controlling. This was not an invasion. It was a message. And at the center of it stood Varen, his violet eyes locked onto Xera's, his expression unreadable. You should have come with me, sister. A battle amongst friends. Zaira did not hesitate. She charged forward, drawing her weapon. The moment she moved, the Tashari soldiers raised their rifles. But she was faster. She leaped over a fallen crate, twisting midair to disarm the nearest soldier with a swift kick. The second tried to strike, but she grabbed his wrist and flipped him to the ground. Varen watched, unmoving. Elias and his security team arrived, weapons raised. Drop your weapons. Now. Varen smirked. You are outnumbered, human. Elias cocked his rifle. Maybe, but we're still standing. Tension thickened. The Tashari warriors stood firm, waiting for Varen's command. Zaira stepped forward. What do you want, Varen? Varen exhaled. The war is coming back, Zaira. The humans think they've won, but our leaders have not forgotten. Zaira's jaw tightened. And what do you expect me to do? Varen's voice was softer now. Come with us. We can make this right. Zaira clenched her fists. She had spent her life fighting for the Tashari. And for what? Destruction. Loss. No, she said firmly. I won't fight your war. Varen's face darkened. Then you fight against us. The final blow. Without warning, Varen lunged. Zaira barely dodged, twisting aside as his blade slashed through the air. The Tashari warriors opened fire, but Elias's team was ready. Blaster shots lit up the market as civilians ran for cover. Zyra and Varen clashed in the center of the chaos. Two warriors, once allies, now enemies. Varen struck fast, but Zyra was faster. She dodged, countered, and landed a powerful kick to his chest, sending him stumbling back. For the first time, Varen looked uncertain. Zyra pointed her weapon at him. This ends now. But before she could fire, a flash grenade exploded between them. When the light cleared, Varen and his warriors were gone. Aftermath. The attack had left the market in ruins. Civilians were shaken, but Zenthar Prime had survived. Elias walked up to Zyra, dusting off his jacket. Well, that could have gone worse. Zyra didn't smile. This was only the beginning. Elias sighed. Yeah, I figured. He glanced at her. You okay? Zyra looked around at the damage, at the people she had sworn to protect. She had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. I'm ready for what comes next. The echoes of battle still lingered in the corridors of Zenthar Prime. Though the fires had been extinguished, and the civilians had returned to their routines, the station felt different. The attack had left a mark, not just on the metal walls, but on the people. Fear, suspicion, the feeling that war was closer than ever. Zyra stood in the security office, staring at the data logs. The Tasheri warriors had vanished, but they had left a message behind. They would return. She knew what that meant. A full-scale invasion was coming. Elias walked in, his usual smirk missing. Any luck tracking them? Zyra shook her head. They are ghosts, but they will be back. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. For a moment, there was silence. Then Elias leaned against the desk, looking at Zyra with a serious expression. You know, you don't have to stay. Zyra's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Elias shrugged. This isn't your fight anymore. You've done more than enough to prove yourself. No one would blame you if you walked away. Zyra clenched her fists. You think I would run? Elias held up his hands. No. I think you deserve a choice. A choice. That was the one thing she had never truly had. She had been born into war, trained to fight, and expected to die for the Tasheri. Even when she had been captured, her fate had never been in her hands. But now she could decide. Would she fight, or would she walk away? A dangerous offer. Before she could answer, the security console blinked red. An incoming message. Zyra pressed the button, and Varen's face appeared on the screen. His expression was calm, but his violet eyes held something deeper. Regret. Or warning? Zyra, he said, I do not call as an enemy. I call as your brother. Elias folded his arms. Oh, this should be good. Zyra ignored him. Say what you came to say. Varen hesitated. Then he spoke. The attack was only a test. The real battle comes soon. The High Command has already sent the fleet. Zenthar Prime will fall. Elias cursed under his breath. Zyra's jaw tightened. Then why warn me? Varen's gaze softened. Because I do not wish to see you fall with them. There is still a place for you, Zyra. Come back. Zyra's heart pounded. This was it. The final choice. She could leave. Avoid the battle. Return to the only life she had ever known. Or she could stand with the humans, the people she had once called enemies, the people who had given her a second chance. A warrior's decision. Zyra exhaled slowly. I am not coming back, Varen. Varen's expression darkened. You would choose them over your own blood. Zyra's voice was steady. I am choosing what is right. Varen's fists clenched. For a moment, she thought he might try to argue. But then his face hardened. So be it, he said. You leave us no choice. The screen cut to black. Elias ran a hand through his hair. Well, that went well. Zyra turned to him. We need to prepare. Elias nodded. I'll alert the command. But we both know. We're outnumbered. Zyra's eyes glowed with determination. Then we make sure they remember why humans are not so easily defeated. The final battle. The attack came 3 days later. The Tasheri fleet emerged from hyperspace, their warships blotting out the stars. Fighters swarmed through the defense grid, and explosions rocked the station. Zyra led the ground forces, fighting alongside Elias and the security team. They were outgunned, outmatched, but not out of the fight. Blaster fire lit up the corridors. Zyra moved like a shadow, taking down Tasheri warriors with precision. Then, in the middle of the chaos, Varen appeared. He stood at the center of the docking bay, his blade drawn, waiting for her. Zyra stepped forward, gripping her weapon. "No more words," she said. Varen nodded. "Only honor." The fight was swift and brutal. Two warriors, once brothers, now enemies. Varen was skilled, but Scyra had changed. She was no longer the soldier she once was. She had learned new ways to fight. And in the end, she was faster. Her blade cut through the air, disarming Varen with a final strike. He fell to his knees, breathing heavily. Zyra pointed her weapon at him. "Surrender." Varen looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw acceptance in his eyes. "Perhaps you were right," he whispered. The battle outside still raged, but Zyra knew the tide had turned. A new future. The battle ended hours later. The Tasheri fleet was forced to retreat. Xanthar Prime had survived. Zyra stood on the command deck, watching the enemy ships disappear into the void. Elias walked up beside her. "Hell of a fight." Zyra nodded. "It is over." Elias smirked. "For now." Zyra turned to him. "I am staying." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." She nodded. "I do not run from battle. And this is my home now." Elias grinned. "Glad to hear it. Welcome to the team." As the station returned to normal, Zyra felt something she had never known before. Belonging. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life, she was truly free.